First of all, I would like to wish all of you a wonderful good morning. Karibu Kenya, for those who are not from Kenya. I'm hearing there are about 20 countries represented. It's enormous. So I'm very delighted to welcome all of you here to this disaster risk reduction training for African local governments, but I'm also happy to hear that there are also civil society representatives, that there are representatives from national governments, because I think it's only possible if all sectors, if all spheres work together to really get an impact. You will have a look at how you and your stakeholders can integrate urban resilience principles into your local government frameworks. Asanteni sana.
And so the Sendai framework, which I will be explaining a little bit later, it's a process, it's an ongoing process that has been for many years at the global level of defining how to reduce disasters, how to reduce the impact of disaster risk. So for example, you will hear a lot from the UNDRR and many people who work on disaster risk reduction that we don't talk about natural disasters anymore. And this, we will look later into this, but this is from a growing understanding of disasters and how we can reduce them. So this idea of that it just happens and we cannot do anything about it because it's a natural disaster, we have moved beyond that to look at the components of disaster and how we can deal with it. So we talk about disaster reduction, disaster response, risk prevention, and many of these concepts encompass under the DRR or disaster risk reduction framework. But we're also increasingly talking about resilience building. And I will ask a little bit later what it is, but this is also moving forward with the impacts of climate change on living with uncertainty. So it's not always we can expect to know what will going to happen. So we have to also learn how to live with different impacts, cascading impacts also, like a hazard could generate other things in the systems that move cities, and also the idea of bouncing back, building back better.
Kilimani faces challenges like deforestation of the mangrove, and you will understand why mangrove is so important. We have a belt of mangrove surrounding the city. This is a picture of, unfortunately, quite common situation when we have floods. This was last year, 2023. Many of the trees were destroyed, households and everything. And the mangrove played a very important role on these difficult moments. It really sustains the winds and extreme weather and waters.
In terms of mitigation measures, we have, through what we call the Land Drainage Authority in Mauritius, created a no-go zone and no expansion zone, which is being used by the urban planning department before the issuance of building and land use permits within the township, and which is also being used when we are carrying out our disaster risk assessments. Since 2021, Mauritius has successfully launched its National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Policy, which is complemented by a strategic framework and a dedicated action plan.
The MCR 2030, or the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative, is not anything new, but it's building upon previous efforts that have been there. So we had started from raising awareness, championing mayors and local government leaders to change their thinking from thinking about disaster from a response angle only, and now take a preventative, anticipatory approach to disasters. So that is the birth of the MCR 2030. The other thing you need to remember is that this is a partnership. It's not just a UNDRR initiative, it's a partnership. And the idea is now to change or to make progress from now that mayors committed to changing the thinking from prevention, from response to prevention. How do they do this? So this is why the MCR 2030 is taking a programmatic approach to give the how, the tools, and to work with the local governments as they make to reality this commitment. So the thinking behind this was born from experience from the core partners who came together and analyzed what programs and projects they had supported in the past, the lessons learned from this initiative, and what gaps had been identified that hinder the development of disaster risk reduction or the progress of disaster risk reduction in many of these cities. And what we realized was summed up into 3 big gaps. One is the knowledge gap, awareness of what disaster risk reduction is, understanding of what it calls for, and how to contextualize the regional, the international frameworks at our local level. The other is, how do we plan? So we did not have, it was not very clear on what tools existed, what advice existed for local governments to be able to take these international frameworks and contextualize them in a way that they can actually undertake specific actions towards these steps. And the other thing was the implementation. In cases that local governments had these plans or these strategies, the way they had been developed, the local governments themselves did not have the capacities to implement these strategies, either because they did not have the technical know-how on how to do, for example, risk assessments, or they did not have the financing to do these particular actions that were already identified in the strategies.
We really need to take a different look as to our site visit yesterday.
Having a park in the city or in the capital city is also evidence that we are passionate about matters disaster.
Can we have some reflections as to the role that public space plays in disaster risk management?
The key issue on public spaces in risk management is, one of them is the fire assembly points. Normally when there's fire, maybe in cities, and there's no place where people can assemble for safety, you find a lot of fatalities. So a public place like you saw the Michuki Park yesterday, whenever there is fire outbreak in the surrounding buildings, people can rush there and assemble.
In many tragedies or in many disaster events, without careful planning and foresight, disability can be the difference between life and death. Okay, so Eric, could you tell us, what specific areas do you believe require immediate attention or improvement to better serve the persons with disability community, and especially with a focus on disaster risk reduction?
One thing that needs to be taken care of is the dealing with attitudes. So that includes what we call universal design, sensitization, capacity building for our people, because sometimes we think we know, but we actually don't know.
In Namibia, we have a minister with disabilities. That is the minister responsible for gender, equality, and social welfare. Now, the very same issue that you are addressing now, whether we should make budgetary provisions for for disability, the laws in Namibia was made very clear to say we don't want to be treated differently. We are just Namibians like everybody else.
Sometimes while we're seated here making the decision, the community is already adapting at the low level. So we need to have a coherence between the decisions made at the government level and what the community is doing as well. Consider indigenous knowledge into this. One of them required early warning systems, one of the solutions.
We are in this together. Disaster risk reduction cannot be achieved by one country or one region. We have to do it globally, because at the end of the day, it's the existence of us as a human race that is at stake.
C'est de mettre sur pied aussi une stratégie de développement pour qu'ensemble, nous puissions essayer de voir dans quelle mesure et monter des projets, comment avoir des stratégies pour faire face à la résilience. Donc pour nous, déjà à la rentrée, nous allons essayer de voir comment former tout le monde, comment sensibiliser la population pour que nous puissions être ensemble et atteindre l'objectif qui est de faire face aux catastrophes et être résilient surtout.
I think one of the fundamental aspects that I picked up from here is the issue of networking. The similarities in terms of the challenges that we have as local authorities. Besides that, also not only the challenges, but the fact that most of the solutions are already available in some of the local authorities.
Yeah, so partnership is another one, because that's why we have a session like this for cities to come together and learn from each other. So as a city, we've been doing an exchange learning from different cities in Africa and also global.
Ville qui se lance dans la résilience, que réellement il nous faut prendre conscience qu'aujourd'hui Nous ne pouvons plus planifier une ville, nous ne pouvons plus mettre en place des actions dans une ville sans prendre en compte la réduction des risques et catastrophes. Aujourd'hui, nous devons intérioriser dans notre planification urbaine les concepts de la réduction des risques et catastrophes pour permettre à ce que toutes les populations qui vivent dans les villes puissent avoir les conditions idoines pour pouvoir agir et se mouvoir dans les meilleures conditions.
For the case of Dar es Salaam, we have done well in the issue related to nature-based solution. As currently, we have a guideline on urban greening, where we managed to have 3 pilot areas in 3 municipalities.
First of all, we'll have to work on the elements of awareness at all levels. Community, today we have just learned about integrating or working with the communities and considering all the other aspects, and also looking into trying to strengthen the financial capacity through looking into donors to possibly fund us in implementing some of our DRR initiatives that will enable us to make the city more resilient, and also just go more into stakeholder collaborations.
We have a common vision, which is to make sure that our communities are protected and are able to bounce back better from disaster events.